Hey all, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be discussing how I review my code with AI. So in my recent post, how I actually use AI to code, I mentioned that I've started using AI for code reviews. In this post, I wanted to give a bit more color on how I actually do that. AI for code reviews. So AI is good, not great at reviewing code, but it's also available 24/7 to do a code review and doesn't get mad when you ping it multiple times for the same general code logic, which makes it far more accessible than the human equivalent. I find AI is most useful as another set of eyes. It typically has a good grasp of standard practices in a language, but is less useful if you go off that paved road. And in my experience, most code bases of sufficient size have left the paved road for at least some portion of the code base. It might be your business logic using a different architectural pattern or something weird like that. You might have patched like a core library that makes it different than what's in the outside world. Or it might just be stylistic choices, like maybe you're more functional in an object-oriented land or language, or maybe you're more object-oriented in a functional language. Each organization has its own quirks, and the AIs are not as good at that, even when you provide them with extra context, because they're just trained so much more heavily on what's out there in the wild. Still, I think having another pair of eyes is useful for catching things that you might have missed or offering suggestions for improvements in areas where you weren't sure were worthwhile. And I find it useful enough that I now do a passive AI review before shipping it off to human review. I basically do push stuff up, check it myself, then I ask the AI for its review, might make changes based on that, and then I go to human review when I feel like it's all packaged up and nice and ready to go. A simple AI code review. So I most commonly ask AI for a review with a very simple prompt. I basically say review the code in this commit and give me 3 things I could do to improve it. And so I run this via Claude Code CLI and I use atomic commits, which is why it's phrased this way. Atomic commits are basically my whole feature branch is just one commit. And so when I'm asking it to say review the code in this commit, it's basically review the whole feature that I've changed. But you can rephrase this to fit your own use case. So if you're like just copying pasting it into the chat window, you can just say review this code, which is very useful if it's just like 1 or 2 files that are easily copy and pastable. But in my experience, most features at work are going to be like multiple files. And so for that, using the CLI and just say like check the things in this commit is just easier, more ergonomic for me to check it, and it has more context about it. If you're using a feature branch, obviously you can say this branch instead of this commit. And then if you have a specific piece of logic you want reviewed, I often just ask for that directly, like, hey, this function looks clunky, or this is how I'm doing caching, but I feel like there's probably a better way, or like, is there a library that helps with this? Things like that. The same way that you'd ask for a human reviewer, like, here's a code review, I particularly think that this piece needs extra reviewing, is what you can do with the AI. Now, a few tips that I found to push the AI towards more useful reviews after doing this for a couple months. First is you want to limit scope to just the code you're changing so it doesn't try to boil the ocean. The AIs do have limited context windows, so this would not be very useful. What they're going to do by default is like try and review like everything. They're going to try and read up on everything to understand more and then come back and do the review. But by doing that, they're just going to waste their context window, which means that they're going to slowly forget what you told them at the beginning. And that is not what you want. And so by just limiting it to the scope that you have, it tries to prevent them from going down those rabbit holes and still give you a useful review in a reasonable amount of time. The next is to push it to actionable feedback by framing it as suggestions for improvement versus code feedback. So some AIs are heavily sycophantic. Claude used to be super sycophantic. 4.5. Sonnet is actually a lot better at this, I think, but they do still tend to bias towards trying to say nice things versus particularly useful things. And so by asking for things that we can improve, like together, it tends to give more actionable feedback versus like, give me feedback on this code. And it's gonna be like, you're doing great. Here's like maybe one item that might be able to be changed. I will note that this also works for humans as well. If you ask for feedback, everyone's gonna be like, oh, this is so good. But then if you ask for like, hey, what are a few things that could be improved? They feel like they're not saying that you're bad. They're just like actually helping you out to be better. And they'll typically give better feedback. This is like the mom test, basically. The next is to cut down to just the top ideas by limiting it to 3. I think that only 1 to 2 ideas are typically ones that I'll end up implementing. And so if you let it give you like a ton of ideas, a lot of those are just going to be trash. And so by just doing 3, it's like enough that you can read, enough that you can get a few ideas out of it. Some of those are going to be good, and you don't waste your time reading a bunch that like are probably not even that useful. And so the system is not fancy by any means, but it does give me a quick sanity check so that I can move on with my day while still getting the benefits of it. Okay, so a more extensible AI code review. So I have another command that I use for AI code reviews that I found useful at work. I don't usually use this on my own projects because they just aren't really necessary, but at work I tend to do it because the code base is just much larger. And I will say that it's not that much better at the reviews itself, but it is more extensible so you can check additional things. And so my command basically asks the AI to do a code review, run the linter, and run all tests, not just tests on my files, but the related files in the changes. And it does each of these in a subagent to help save the context window. Then it's going to summarize those changes I could make to improve it. And the reason this is useful for me is because code review, obviously I want that. The linter actually takes quite a long time to run on our code base. And so doing that in a subagent and its ability to parallelize that is great. Also, the linting syntax for running the command is like annoying, and so having the AI just go and do it saves me time and effort. And then running the tests also run a lot or take a long time to run, and running the full projects test takes like forever, but running a single file test is like pretty fast. But if you have multiple files that you want to test on, the syntax again is annoying, and you got to like do them one by one. And so getting the AI to do these annoying tasks for me that I want to check, but I just don't want to do it myself, has been really, really useful for just double checking that everything's working as I expected before I push it up. And so here's the command. It is super simple. It basically just says run the following steps in parallel with a generic subagent for each one. This is enough for Claude Code to understand this. Each other AI CLI thing I think will have its own way of doing this or its own hit or miss rate on this, but Claude Code always understands this should be subagents. And then the first one just says like, run the tests on the files in my current commit, run the lint on the files in my current commit, and then review the code. And then it's asking to summarize these so that I can easily debug. You can get the full text here. I'm on the website. And I'll note that like this seems too simple, but like it works pretty well. And I'm just currently copy and pasting this in because I previously had this Claude Code / command, which is basically the same thing. These / commands, these skills, they're all just like glorified markdown files. And so when people are talking about this, really they're just talking about this, but it's just in a specific format so that it's easily hooked in. But at work we use these VMs that get wiped every now and then. And so all of this stuff kept getting wiped. And so now I just save it in like a notepad, and then I copy and paste it so that it's always there. It never gets wiped. But this is only doing 3 things, but you could easily extend this to additional stuff if you wanted to, but I just haven't found the use case for it yet. Next. So yeah, my code review process, super simple. I think the base AI configurations are pretty good, so I really haven't extended this so much, but you totally can do that. I think there's a lot more things that you might want to do around creating expert agents for different areas like architecture, security, and performance. You can hook in additional tools. Not sure what those tools would be, but maybe like a Jira to see if it's actually fulfilling the task or something like that. Maybe SimGrep for finding like problems in the code. And then of course, building more detailed skills for the agents to use, like how do you actually do good code reviews? Like what are extra things you should be looking at? What are some of the stylistic or architectural decisions we've made as a company that go off the beaten path or the paved road so that it can give better kind of code base specific reviews? These are all things I think you could do, and that would be super useful to make this a better code reviewer, but I just haven't found the pain points to necessarily need to do that yet. And for me, I think the biggest benefits are really just, the fast feedback and keeping the system pretty simple. And so I'll play around with those, but for now, this is good enough for me. So if you like this post, you might also like how I actually code with AI as a senior software engineer. You might also be interested in stop vibe coding, start power coding, how to write quality software faster with agentic AI. And finally, I vibe coded a C# library with Claude Code, and here's 6 things I learned. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.